So, Coach Kennedy, really exciting development here for you. You are going to be returning to football, to coaching. Tell us a little bit about how it feels.
I wish I had some really good words to describe it. I can hardly believe it's actually happening. It's been so long that I've been fighting so hard to get back there. Now it's really going to happen, and man, I'm just so thankful.
Yeah, well, I mean, you went through a 7-year legal battle, and this obviously culminated at the Supreme Court last year, last June, when you won 6-3. And that victory was really predicated on the fact that the school district was seen as compromising or restricting your First Amendment rights to pray on the 50-yard line. And there's so much to unpack there. I think people know your story, and so I want to get back into some of those details. But before we do, what does it feel like to go back? Because now you've got a public persona, you've been out there, and I would imagine there's probably some pressure or maybe even nervousness going back out there to coach again.
Yeah, there's a lot of nervousness, and most of it is just because of the display it's going to be. I set out to just pray by myself, and that's what my covenant with God was at the very beginning, was just give a prayer of thanks. And now that it's become headline news, that's my biggest angst that I think I have, is exactly that, is having to pray in front of a bunch of people when it's just me thanking God.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because you've maintained throughout all of this, that this was you praying on the 50-yard line, that the kids had a choice to come and join if they wanted to after the game. If they didn't want to, they didn't have to. Why do you think? Because it's really interesting looking at this. This went on for 7 years, and it looks like the legal fees to the district almost are $2 million. I mean, it's a lot of money and time they spent on this. Why do you think there was such a resistance to allowing you to pray on the 50-yard line the way you were?
I think it really has to do with the lawyer group that is representing the Bremerton School District. They're the ones that have really been the spearhead in driving this thing. The school district and I were trying to work things out. I thought we would be able to do it like adults and just sit there and have an actual conversation about it and work through the problems. But then their lawyers got involved, and they had their own agenda, obviously, and they got the separation in church and state group and the big haters of everybody and taking away freedoms, and had them representing them. And that's what's really sad, is because that same group covers almost all of Washington state schools. So that's a scary precedence that they're setting just there alone.
How did you, and I want to talk more about what's ahead, but how did you deal with the comments? Look, this is something everybody had an opinion on, and it's actually it's a transformational case, right? I mean, this has a monumental impact on how religious freedom cases are going to be looked at across the country. How have you dealt with the commentary, particularly the negative commentary, right? It's one thing to have supporters, and you have plenty of them, but when people come after you, I would imagine, saying and doing horrific things. How have you navigated that? Because it's been a long road of 7 years.
Most of the time, I try to understand where they're coming from, and I try to have a conversation with them. It's really sad when people are just so bullheaded and just blinded and have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. The ignorance is just so frustrating, and trying to get through to people. And I give everybody a chance to speak. I try to listen to where they're coming from. I try to understand why they're coming from that. And then I just ask them in return to respond the exact same way. Listen to what I have to say. Take a look at this from a constitutional perspective. And the same rights that are protecting you to run your mouth are the same ones that I'm trying to do to thank God for. I've tried to meet with some of them. I had lunch with a couple of them, and other ones are those real tough guys that sit behind their computer all day. And those I just don't have time for. If you don't want to listen, I'll block you and just move on. The threats and everything else, I'm a Marine. I'm not worried about any of those guys. They're all talk.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting that we're at a place in our country where we can't just have a disagreement, right? I mean, what you're describing is being able to sit down with people who disagree, and people take politics and, Supreme Court cases so personally now that, they can't even engage in that sort of conversation. And that's a troubling thing. But what were you feeling last summer? Obviously, it was a big summer for the Supreme Court, and your case was one of the really big ones. We obviously had Roe overturned. But when you heard that it was a 6-3 verdict in your favor, what went through your mind and your heart?
Yeah, first of all, my head just, totally exploded. And to think that it's finally coming to an end. And I really didn't have a lot of time to process it because we jumped right onto the interviews. I think we did 87 interviews that week alone. And it was just getting the message out that, hey, this impacts all people, anybody that works in the public square. This gives them the freedom to be able to practice their religion. It doesn't have to be the Christianity or Muslim or Jewish. Any faith whatsoever that you want to express is protected under the First Amendment, and that just put that permanent smile on my face.
Now, I'm going to ask the obvious question here. When you head back as an assistant coach, because the district has confirmed that that will be happening, and we'll talk about specifically when, but when you go back, do you plan to pray at the 50-yard line? When you get back out there and you're on the sidelines and you're coaching, are you going to pick right back up where you left off?
Oh, absolutely. That's what my plan was from the very beginning. It was my covenant to, after every game, just take a knee and thank God. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to shake hands with the opposing team, talk to the coaches, shake their hand, and then I'm going to turn around like I always have and take a knee and not worry about any of the repercussions and see who's looking or anything. I'm just going to have that private moment with God, and whatever happens, happens.
Well, I'm betting you're going to have a lot more people joining you now than maybe even before in light of this. I know a lot of people have been very supportive of you. And I think, we're talking here about people's ability. And I think we've had a real hard time in this country really differentiating, okay, well, when can somebody have this freedom to express themselves and when can't they? And it really did seem for a lot of people watching your case confusing as to why somebody couldn't voluntarily pray on the 50-yard line and a coach couldn't do that and students could choose to either come or not. Yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on this at all, but I'm going to throw it out there because I do think it's interesting. There's a lot of things happening in schools today and a lot of debate around a lot of issues that we trust kids to be okay with, and a lot of parents aren't. We're sort of throwing a lot of things out at them in schools. And yet when it comes to a voluntary prayer, that's the line for some people. What do you think drives that, not just the school district, but just that general sort of pushback on prayer in the way that we've seen?
Well, I think it has to do with a lot of ignorance, and it's just the way that the times have been. When Lemon came out, that was the case that we just overturned. That's the one that took prayer basically out of the schools, and everybody hears the separation of church and state, and they think that that's law. They think that that's part of the Constitution or it's one of the amendments, and people don't. It's just ignorance of not knowing what it actually says. So they've been taught from the very beginning that, there's separation in church and state. Well, that doesn't mean what they think it means. And the First Amendment is supposed to complement each other with the free exercise and the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion. All of those work together, not opposing, but the courts originally made it to where they were really opposing each other, and now it cleared it up. And hey, I see great things happening and prayer just coming out all over the place in the United States.
So, as we round out to a close here, how soon do you think you'll be able to rejoin? I mean, obviously they've announced that this is happening, that you're going to be an assistant coach. When do you think you'll be able to get on the field with the kids?
I've been talking to the head coach and trying to find out what our schedule looks like, when spring ball is, if we have any coaches clinics, the team meetings, those kind of things. So I haven't got any of those in hard dates yet. The school district is reluctantly, bringing me back, and you can feel them dragging their feet a little bit. So I'm sure there's some feelings that are out there still, and just hopefully they'll see I just come in with a smile on my face and want to be part of the team and help the Bremerton Knights become, those great young men that I know they are.
And last question for you, when you talk about legacy on this, not just nationally, but in your community there, in terms of just the young people who have been watching this, the families who have been watching this, what are you hoping to leave behind on that legacy front?
Yeah, I'm just hoping that everybody remembered that I stood up and just fought for what was right. It wasn't about this. It wasn't about that. It was one man standing up to, basically tyranny and not being, squelched, being able to stand up and for what you believe in and being able to have those good, strong roots where you don't give in when things get tough. And no matter how long it goes on, some things are just absolutely 100% worth fighting for.
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time. Looking forward to catching up again once you get back on the field and hearing how it goes. Thanks so much.
All right. I'll see you soon, buddy.